Hi, Tony here from All the Remote Things again. And on this episode, I've got a fantastic friend of mine. I'm so happy to have Ellen Grove. How are you, Ellen Grove?
I'm doing well, thank you, Tony.
Did you notice I was really officious there and I used your full title as well?
You did. You did. I saw that.
I'd love you to introduce yourself to the viewers.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, my name is Ellen Grove, which is actually my name, and I understand that's a suburb in an Australian city as well. I've
It is.
discovered that on Google.
It is. It is.
So,
It's actually in Brisbane, just near. I used to live right next to that suburb. Yeah.
yeah, I was quite surprised when I discovered that because that's what you get if you Google my name. So I would describe myself as an itinerant agile coach, trainer, facilitator, change agent. Um, I started off in tech as a software tester. I spent most of the past couple of years as the interim managing director of Agile Alliance. I've done a lot of things in the agile world.
No, that's good. Brilliant. Yeah, and we've crossed paths many times, and I've had the pleasure of working with you on some casts that we've done and working through COVID. So that was fantastic. And one of those things that I've crossed paths with you is because obviously you're the director of the Agile Alliance, although your term is coming to an end as I understand it. But I thought it'd be brilliant to have you on and talk about the Agile Alliance and how it's changed and met the challenges of the last 3 years. So it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to ask that question of you, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's been a wild ride. It's been a wild ride. Um, for me personally, I first became aware of Agile Alliance in 2008 because I attended Agile 2008 in Toronto. And to be completely transparent, I was a little overwhelmed by the event. It was, there were like 1,500 people there. It was all the tracks. It was all, 5 days. And for me, I found that a bit much. And I spent the next few years going to agile coach camps, going to conferences that were focused on play, kind of outside the sphere of Agile Alliance. And I got invited by a friend of mine, Declan Wellen, who was a board member at Agile Alliance. He said, "Hey, have you ever thought about being on the board? We could use people who think like you." And one thing led to another, and I ended up joining the board in 2017. And at that time, certainly in my head, and to a certain degree in reality, Agile Alliance was really focused around how do we put on Agile 20XX. It's the big conference. It's kind of the flagship conference of the Agile world. It's a great event, but my question was, that's great. What do we do the other 360 days a year? What do we do for all of the people who aren't going to participate in that event? Because there's a lot of constraints on participating. It's expensive. It's always held in the US. You got to take 5 days out of your life to go and attend. And my take on it was there's a big wide world of agile people out there. How do we help connect them? How do we support their journey throughout the year in addition to doing this fabulous conference? And so that was my mindset coming in as a board member. I was really curious because I'd been involved with Agile India by that point. I was participating in agile events all over the world, so I had a lot of connections. And I was, my focus was, how do we start to pull some of those people in? How do we start to create that big, vibrant, worldwide community? Because I think the Agile Alliance is in a special place to be able to do that, being the umbrella where all things agile come together. It's founded on the values and principles of the manifesto. It's the intention of the organization, the objective of the organization is to create spaces where agile people can come together and share their learnings and learn from each other and argue, as agile people like to do, about what's worked better for them or what works better, regardless of what's kind of agile you're practicing, regardless of which tools, which methodology. And so the Agile Alliance is a place, in my mind, is a natural place to try and create that global community. And we were making some inroads on that. We were trying to think about How do we establish presence at other events? We had partnership with Agile India for a while. How do we had partnership with some events in Europe. We were talking with XP about bringing XP into the fold. And we were thinking about also how do we provide experiences and services and knowledge to members outside of events, because there's a huge content library that Agile Alliance has that's been amassed over the years. And it's great. It's non-commercial content. It's people talking about Agile in ways generally where they're not trying to sell you something. They're just trying to share what they've learned. They're trying to share information. And so all of those things are coming together, and it's like great. And how do we grow that? How do we grow our global membership? And then 2020 rolled around,
Yeah.
and now
Yeah. Then the world goes boom.
the wheel goes boom. I had in February 2020, I was elected chair of the board of the board of directors of Agile Alliance, and then the next month, the pandemic happened. Everybody got sent home from work, and at the same time, there were some internal changes at Agile Alliance that were causing us to deviate from business as usual, even though business as usual was going totally off the rails anyways, because we had to cancel the Deliver Agile conference. We had to cancel Agile 2022, Agile 2020, and the knock-on effects. The pandemic destabilized everything, especially if you're doing in-person events, because we couldn't have events for a couple of years. So we had to think about it. It's interesting because I ended up through a series. I'm just going to describe it as a series of unfortunate events, although it actually wasn't a series of unfortunate events. I ended up as managing director of Agile Alliance, as interim managing director in 2020, because we needed to fill that role. And on one hand, we had this opportunity to really do some of those things about how do we connect the world globally, because the barrier of relying on this physical get together just didn't exist, because it wasn't possible to get together. But at the same time, I discovered how closely the organization was aligned to a lot of it. It grew up around making that in-person event happen. And all of the revenue of the organization comes from that in-person event. And so that presented a certain set of challenges. So probably long-winded history, more than you wanted to hear, but
I think, and you short yourself, by the way. I'll just jump in. Serendipitous that you got that opportunity because you did such a good job. So
sure, yes, serendipitously.
there you go.
So, but it was really a challenge. So we had to think about, how do we start to serve our community through virtual gatherings? How do we make use of all of this fabulous information we have? How do we make use of the relationships that exist within the Agile Alliance community to help connect people and amplify learning? And so Agile Alliance, we did a lot of we got started on a lot of things that were different than what had been done in the past. We changed the membership structure, which I think was really important, because one of the very first thing I did when I joined the board was to start to explore ways, how can we make membership, because it is a paid membership, more accessible to people around the world. Because what seems reasonable if you live in North America or Western Europe can be a prohibitive amount in other parts of the world. So how do we make that membership accessible to everybody? How do we start to create value in membership apart from attending that big shiny flagship event? And so we spun up member events every month. There was virtual meetups, there was meet and greet, there was virtual lean coffee that was happening every month. April Jefferson and I started a Game On meetup, which we'll talk about a little bit later, I hope.
We will talk about later on, yes.
Just, a regular series of events to get people together. And so doing things differently than Agile Alliance had done before. And it was kind of ironic, because you'd think that Agile Alliance as an organization should be agile, should be adaptive, should be able to, work with all of that uncertainty. But I think there's a threshold beyond which the sheer volume of uncertainty and unpredictability tips you from complexity into chaos. And that's what the past couple of years was like.
It was such a big tidal wave of it, wasn't it? And I remember working with you at the time, because we were doing something different with that webinar that we put together, and just even bringing that together and getting people together was an interesting thing for all of us. I think we learned a lot out of that.
It has been, because it's been a really mixed blessing in that the pandemic forced us to rethink, how do we work together? How do we connect? To challenge some of the assumptions that we had as agile people about how the world is meant to work. Well, suddenly nobody has a co-located team. So
No.
what does that mean if you're an agile team, right? It opens up incredible opportunities. You're not limited by the constraints that co-location imposes. But then I'll just say the time conversion table that I used to carry in my
Oh
head
yes,
to
yeah.
try to keep track of when I was trying to call a meeting amongst any group of people was huge. It introduces those sorts of challenges, the logistics challenges, some of you know, uh, the tools are coming along to improve interpersonal communication when we're working remotely, to improve how can we collaborate remotely. Because if you want to have a group conversation with people to solve a wicked problem, if you get everybody together in a meeting room with whiteboards, with markers and Sharpies, and you can have that conversation, you generally don't have to explain to anybody, how does the room work? How does gravity work? How do markers work? How do sticky notes work? And when you're using online collaboration tools, you can't take for granted that it's going to be as seamless an experience where you can just jump right to the how do we get things done together.
Yes.
So,
I would contend that we've probably passed that moment now, though. I think there would be. Oh, you'd still, because obviously I work for a remote organisation, and our job is to help people work better in that environment. But I think I've seen that tidal wave of people. Most people have a can of Zoom or the variants of Zoom or whatever your flavour of choice is. Some are better, some are worse, some are good. Most people have a flavour of how that works. Most people have a flavour of how most of the sort of sticky noting type things working. The piece that's probably having a biggest effect now, and you and I were talking a little bit off air about that, and it's a good segue into it, is I think the challenge now is fully remote, yes, but it's that hybrid version of it as well. That's challenging, where you have some in and some out. What are you seeing with that? What are the challenges that you've noticed over this period?
well, it's funny because I'll say in the before times, back in the distant past, before
I call it
2020.
BC, before COVID.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I certainly worked with teams that were distributed teams, that were hybrid teams, where there would be a certain number of people who were physically together in a location, and they had on their team people who weren't with them. Whether it was there would be one or two team members who were working remotely, coming in from a home office. I've worked with teams where the team itself was split between a couple of locations. Have lots of experience with that. And to be honest, I would always grumble that that's kind of the hardest thing to deal with, because when everybody is in the same place, you're all in the same environment, there's a certain set of rules about what's available to you in terms of how you might interact, how do you share ideas, how do you bring your work together. And when you're fully remote, you have a different set of tools and a different set of constraints, but it's a fairly level playing field in terms of what people have access to. And when you bring those two worlds together, which seems to be where we're going right now, I mean, certainly the organizations that I've talked to, there are some organizations that are continuing to work fully remotely, and that's wonderful. But there are a lot of organizations that have some reliance on being together in person, or recognizing absolutely there are times that we need to be together in person because we can get stuff done most effectively that way. And there are other organizations who, for other reasons, are mandating, well, we're going to put ourselves in this situation of where people are going to be on site part of the time, and then they can choose
Yeah.
to work from home the rest of the time. Anyhow, the net result is pretty much what I'm seeing is the world is in this kind of perpetually hybrid state, where when you're doing anything that is a group endeavor, you're working with some mixture.
Yeah.
And that makes it really, really hard, because there are advantages to both ways of working. And often those advantages to both ways of working or to each way of working just aren't present in the other way. When we're sitting in a room together, there's so much information that's available to us about what's going on with each of us in terms of what we say, but I can pick up on your body language. I can see that you have legs, like I get your whole body, not just
Yeah.
what I choose to show you. Um, and honestly, I think video kind of flattens it out a little bit. It's not that video is a medium that isn't capable of conveying emotion, but for those of us who aren't trained actors focused on conveying that emotion, I think the experience of interacting through video tends to flatten things a little bit. And then, but there's benefits to working remotely as well in terms of the ability to bring people together. The fact, and sometimes it's an advantage, that all we can see of each other is what's in the little box. It's interesting because there's some politics happening in Ottawa. And I know you don't want to talk about politics, but the part that I want to talk about is there's a contentious meeting that's happening today. And they had an in-person meeting a few days ago, and it got completely thrown off track because there were some heated opinions in the room, and that derailed the meeting. So the next meeting they're having on the subject is going to be purely virtual. And I was thinking about that as a facilitator. And the advantage of that is when you've got really contentious things, when you've got really hot personalities in the room,
Mm-hmm.
working remotely gives you a different set of tools to manage that experience. And it's a little bit harder to derail things if you're minded to derail. So anyhow, interesting advantages, interesting disadvantages. What that means going forward, though, is I think we have to do a whole lot of exploration
Yeah.
in each of these contexts about how do we make it work best together for us? How do we take advantage of the benefits of being together? And when is it important to do that? And when might we choose to invest in that in order to get those benefits of, improved communication and some of those moments of serendipity? You used the word serendipity earlier.
Indeed.
Often when we get together remotely, all of that relationship building stuff that just kind of happens off the side at the water cooler because we happen to have lunch together, because I happened to walk past you and I heard you were talking to somebody else about something. Some of that happens online, but it happens really differently. And I don't think it happens as much because when we're online, we tend to be a little bit more focused about, I'm here to do my work thing with this person, and this is our time box, and this is our container. So how do we blend those things? How do we start to recognize this is the stuff where focusing on the being present together physically side of the hybrid equation is important. And here's the stuff where we can do this in a remote fashion. We can do this in a distributed fashion, and we can take advantage of what some of the tools offer. We can take advantage of some of the benefits of being able to work asynchronously that way. But I think it's, there's definitely not one size fits all. And it's another one of those areas. As an agile person, I tend to get twitchy when somebody says best practices at the best of times. And it's one of those things where I really don't think there are any best practices. It's a matter of good practices in context.
Yeah, I
It's
think it's a number of practices that you design for the context of the interactions and the way that you're going to interact. And I think, that's something
yeah,
we've done a lot. Is it's not much like, many of those agile practices that have been tried to turn into a cookie cutter momentum type thing. It doesn't work because when you go in, there's a different nuance. It's the same in this situation, right? There are a bunch of things we know work, and there's a toolkit of things that we know are quite useful. But what are the best ones for the context of your organizational constructs and what you're trying to
yeah,
achieve at the same time? Because this thing's not going away. We see it as much as people are trying to say you have to come back to work. People are actually rallying against that, and we can see that it's happening. So we're going to have to come to grips with it and how we work with it. So I have one
well,
simple mantra, Ellen, that I'll throw out to you comment is that when I have people that are in physicality and I have people in digital, and it's that hybrid mix, I literally say to them, well, you're no longer hybrid. Actually, you're remote. You're all remote, and you need to treat this as a remote workshop.
yeah. Well, and I think that's what ends up happening most of the time, because I think that's the best way to bring equity to the situation, in terms of leveling the playing field to put everybody on the same footing for how can I engage with this problem? How do I interact with other people? What makes me a little bit sad about that, though, is that I think when, I don't know, maybe this is showing my bias, maybe it's showing my age. You also see that there are times when you get together with people in person to do that work, and you recognize that we wouldn't have gotten here this quickly or in this way, having this conversation through a different medium. The other thing, too, that the remoteness tends to bring back, and you said we've gotten past the tool thing. We've gotten past the tool thing for typing at each other and for talking to each other. But I like playful methods of doing work. I like using facilitation techniques that make use of the space, that encourage people to use their bodies, encourage people to get up and move around and interact with information a little bit more directly, rather than moving pixels, and electrons around through a keyboard or a mouse. And one of the things that I think is slowly being recovered, but really got lost, is when we made the switch to working remotely. And this was my experience of working remotely previously. The channel for how we interacted narrowed to we talk to each other and we type at each other. And sometimes we send pictures back and forth. And there are so many ways that we collaborate in terms of building shared models together, whether it's, the experience of sitting together in front of a whiteboard with a marker, and we both have a marker and we're drawing at the same time. You can do that electronically. It's not quite the same. But or when we've got, those piles of sticky notes. Yes, you can sort sticky notes electronically, but when you're in person in a room and you're using the space to share, and like there's different stuff available to you. And what I'm really hoping is that the tool sets for working remotely, for working hybridly, start to pull a little bit more of that in, recognizing that even if we are connecting digitally and the information has to be reduced to electrons that are flowing between us, that we can still engage our other senses and use those as we're communicating to solve problems. And this is something that April and I have been playing a little bit with in Game On, because we've been trying to hack games. And I'm sorry if I'm getting ahead of the program
No,
here,
no,
but
let's
okay,
go there. Let's talk about it. April Jefferson, by the way.
yeah,
Well, we've had April on the show, so shout out to April. She was awesome and just a wonderful human being as well. So, but yeah, by all
yeah.
means, let's talk about that. Let's go there.
Okay. Yeah, because one of the things we were trying to do, we're both really convinced of the importance of bringing playful approaches to getting work done, because it's how people learn about each other, it's how people learn to work together, it's how people solve difficult problems together. Often it involves an element of being playful together. And what we've been exploring in Game On is not how do we create online games where people do these things together, where we take something that we did in person and we create the virtual equivalent, and it involves setting up some big complicated online structured game container to do the thing. We've been focusing on how do we take these exercises that as agile trainers and agile coaches we all have in our back pocket, and figure out how do we do them with a virtual group in as low tech a way as possible. So the very first thing we did together was a drawing workshop, and it was about how do we draw together collaboratively, how do we use drawing as a way to collaborate and share ideas even if we're not in the same room. And it didn't consist of, figuring out what the best electronic drawing tool was and how do we all draw together. It was, well, wherever you are, you grab a pen, you grab a piece of paper, I'm going to grab a pen, I'm going to grab a piece of paper, and we're going to do something together and we're going to share our results. And there could be a next step to that where we figure out how do we bring them together electronically. But even just that simple practice of you draw a picture of what you understand and I draw a picture of what I understand, and we hold them up to our webcams so that we can see and talk about them, that widens communication hugely. So figuring out how do we do those things. Another one of the ones we did in Game On was we hacked the marshmallow challenge, which
Oh yeah.
is an exercise. Yeah, everybody gets together and you give them some spaghetti and some tape and some string
Yep.
and a marshmallow, and they have 20 minutes to build a tower that has to suspend, has to be able to hold the marshmallow up. And it's a really great exercise for exploring a whole bunch of concepts around how do teams work together? How do they do iterative and incremental design? All of those sorts of things. And we're like, how do you do that online when people aren't together?
Yeah.
And we figured out a way to put people in groups, set the challenge to the group, ask the people in the group to share, well, what do I have at hand where I am in my context to build that tower? And then the group together collaboratively work to build the tower with, the one person who had whatever the group decided was the best stuff essentially was the builder, but they were building, taking direction from everybody else. And it was crazy. We had people like, hey, I'm going to use this coffee table in my office chair. And they were building towers that were as high as their room. But it was really interesting in terms of how do we break the boundary of this little electronic box to use more of our senses to engage our physical beings in these electronic conversations. And I think that's something that in this, what's seeming to be the perpetually hybrid state, we need to think about a little more.
I'm really, really enthused by that, because I think that is part of the thing that got lost, wasn't it? So you're right, and again, the organisation I work for, we focus on a lot of that as well, right? It's you still have to bring the fun to what we do, um, without obviously derailing it, but you have to have those things that actually allow you to do that. So we did, as a group, and I mentioned it on the cast before, but back when it all started happening, there's some things that you can do too, like online panic rooms. So your online. So we were robbing a bank, and the act of the team robbing a bank, and I can tell you, we've brought some personalities out in our team that we didn't know about. So, some of them might make very good thieves. But anyway, but that's just that act of that whole thing. It was interesting, the water cooler conversation that it spanned, which was what I was sort of getting to, long-winded as usual. So, do you see that the interactions you're doing helps to stitch some of those things that we've lost that you were talking about before as well?
I think it helps to, yeah, I think it helps to do some of that relationship building, to do some of that. How do we recognize each other and what each other's capabilities are and what each other needs help with outside of in a different way than we learn about each other, just sitting down and let's have this meeting and here's the problem at hand and here's what we're here together to do, which is the way a lot of online meetings tend to go, right? So finding opportunities to do, whether it's those team fun activities like the online escape rooms, like the online panic rooms, like getting together to play games, because I mean, there's lots of opportunity. We had a great Agile Alliance. It was a Christmas gathering actually 2 years ago, where we had people getting together playing a series of online games together, and it was hilarious. Oh my gosh, it was so much fun. And it was a great way to get to know the personalities of the people involved, and to see sides of them, and to see, yeah, see aspects of them that they don't necessarily bring to the table, where it's like, and now we're going to sit down to focus on this work problem. But I think it's something that companies, that organizations, that individuals need to pay real attention to. Are we building enough of those opportunities into our work lives when the focus has shifted, when we're working primarily remotely? Because one of the other changes, and this kind of going back to the Agile Alliance, the way people get together around learning is quite different as well in a remote world, right? We
Yeah.
saw this with Agile 2021, which was an experiment in creating this kind of round the world remote conference. And when you go to an in-person event, yeah, maybe you bring your work with you a little bit, but your primary experience is you're at that place.
Yes.
You're at that place, you're taking in all the things that experience has to offer. You're going to those lectures, those workshops, you're interacting with the people that are there. You're usually, you're wandering through the vendor hall because the food is on the other side of it. And but you're getting a chance to talk with people, and it's fun sometime, and that's where your focus is. And maybe you're stepping out a little bit to do a little bit of work. And with virtual learning, my experience has been that that gets turned around, where it's something that even if people sign up for make a big investment in online learning by signing up for a virtual conference or a series of virtual events, it
Mm-hmm.
kind of becomes something they do off the side of their desk
Yes, yeah.
because the environment they're still in, I'm still at home. The input that I'm getting from that thing is this big, not this big. I have other things that are competing for my attention, and you don't immerse yourself in the learning opportunities the same way. And I think that that's something else we're going to have to think about too, as again, and it's figuring out where the balance is, because there's lots of advantages to on-demand learning. I can take this in at my time. I can take it in at my own time, my own pace. I can go and watch that bit of that talk as many times as I want because he said something really interesting and I really want to take it all in. But it's where is the balance between the benefits of being together in person and all of that offers, and all of it offers me as a participant in my ability to focus on it. I think this kind of applies to the workplace too, versus when I'm connecting remotely and I'm doing things from a different environment and there are different things influencing my attention and my focus and my behavior.
I
It's going
think
to be complicated.
I think the thing that we should encourage, is that if you're watching this, one thing that came through very strongly from what Ellen's been saying is don't be afraid to think outside of the box and experiment with it. It might not work, but it might work, right? You made me think of one that in the middle of the pandemic I had forgotten about, where a team that I was involved with, they ran a trivia, but you had to actually get up and you had to go outside with your mobile. And made sure everybody had mobiles, and there were questions about
Yeah.
your environment, and you had to take a photo and send them back, or there was a Menti, and it was a merge of the two, and I'd really forgotten that until you just mentioned it. So I think
Yeah.
that encouragement of doing that and the work that you and April are doing.
Well, I was having a conversation with somebody last week at Agile Tour Montreal, and talking about walking meetings. This is something that a
Mm.
long, long time ago, when I had the privilege of working at a big campus that was situated with a lot of green space around it, my team had a regular practice of, for smaller meetings, we could do walking meetings because there are these beautiful trails to walk through. And it was great. You've got blood flowing to your brain, you're outside, the sun is shining. And we got a lot of work done that way. And the conversation I was having last week was somebody realizing that, well, we can do that when we're remote too. There's no reason that I can't go outside and you can't go outside, and we can walk and we can have the meeting, but we're enjoying the benefits of the blood flowing to our brain and our bodies are moving and we're enjoying whatever weather is outside, and that's stimulating our brains differently. So maybe some different ideas are coming out and we're having a richer conversation than we might have had if we just sat in our, you know, rooms where we've got the curtains drawn because we're trying to get the lighting right. And we need to do more of that. We need to figure out more of how do we merge those two experiences of humans.
That's,
It's there's
yeah.
so many opportunities, but there's so much to figure out about how it can work.
And I think that's the big word. It's an opportunity, because people look at it as a challenge or a barrier, but it's an opportunity to think how we can do this, because it's not going away. So the opportunity for us is to think about the things that we need to do to make those changes. Ellen, it's been fantastic to have you on. We're really close to the end of our time. What I would like to do though is how do people get in touch with you, or how can they touch base with the fantastic work that you and April are doing?
So if you want to join us at the Game On meetups, it is an Agile Alliance member benefit. And so if you go to agilealliance.org and you look into what's involved in membership and Maybe you pay that yourself. Maybe you convince your company to pay for it for you as a benefit. Then you Game On is available to you, and a whole bunch of other meetups are available to you. Um, we're going to start publishing some blog posts about what's going on in the Game On space too. But I'm not, to be honest, I'm not sure if they're going to be publicly available or not. There are lots of moving pieces about the way things are working. Easiest way for people to get a hold of me these days, honestly, is through LinkedIn. If you Google Ellen Grove Agile, you will end up with me. I would have said on Twitter, but that's not working out so well. And so LinkedIn is the best way through social media to find out what's going, for getting in touch with me and possibly to find out what I'm up to. Although I got to get better about posting to LinkedIn, but I'm working on developing that muscle.
Fantastic. Look, it's been fantastic to have you on all the remote things. If you're listening to this and you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe so you can keep up with all the new episodes. Join our Remote AF community. Just go to remoteaf.co, click the community button. That'll take you to a community on Circle that's full of like-minded people who are looking at these challenges that we're just talking about, and many other challenges. It's been fantastic having you on all the remote things today, Ellen. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure to be here talking with you.
Brilliant.